you're willing, I'd
Mhm.
like to ask you, Scott Choppin, what is the biggest risk?
Yeah, no, great question. Like I mentioned before we began the interview, like real estate development, and you could say real estate investment really is entirely a risk mitigation. You called it minimize, so I would say squarely in the middle there. Really, at the end of the day, you know, investing and development are a risk. You like they require risk to be taken to produce these returns that we're describing, right? Always the trade-off. And so, really, where I've arrived in my career, where I am now, is to be risk mitigating everywhere we can. And so, like, I'm not. I'll fill in the answer some more, but there's many places that we mitigate risk. But here's my answer: is it really around a philosophy and a style and approach to how you mitigate risk? And I'll give you an example of what I mean. And by the way, this risk mitigation is a fundamental tenet of our business. In fact, I would say it's probably the most important one because we have so many different exposures to risk in so many different areas, right? Market demand with tenants, interest rates with debt, return characteristics with investors, governmental agencies who oversee us, right? Talked about California, right? That's an increased risk. So when I was a young project manager, I worked for Mike Costa, and basically part of my job, the way I work with Mike and the way he had his project management team structures, as a project manager, you basically were responsible for the full life of a project, from finding the land all the way through to completing it and handing it over to the asset management team after it was leased, right? And that was very unusual. Maybe call it cradle to grave, beginning to end, however you want to describe it. So what that did is that threw me as a young project manager into, like, you didn't have to find new deals if you didn't want to, but I was like incredibly ambitious to to grow my knowledge. I knew I wanted to be a developer, running and forming my own company. Like I knew that, intuitively, since I was 18. And but what I remember was looking at land, and I had good teachers, but when I would look at stuff, it was everything I could make it work. There was no project that I looked at that I couldn't figure out or thought I couldn't figure out how to problem solve, right? There's no deal I can't figure out. The hairiest deals with environmental issues, tough neighborhoods, tough cities, whatever, right? I go, oh, I could go in there, I could figure out a way how to do it, right? And what I figured out, dawned on me years later, is that by having that approach, I took on an incredible amount of additional risk. Now, when I worked for the company, it was their risk, and of course, they were smart about it and only gave me so much, rope to hang myself on a deal. But when I got out on my own, I continued to learn these lessons, and now it's in fact exactly the opposite. There's almost no deal that makes it through the underwriting, right? And I'm in fact very fast. You can talk to our internal teams who bring us deals, people partners, and people who bring deals. Like I'll no, 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 no. And why that's important is because it's a philosophical approach to mitigating risk, meaning acknowledgement of a risk and a willingness to mitigate it and a willingness to say no if it's unmitigatable, right? That's for us, there's some risks that can't be transferred, right? The construction risk under a personal guarantee to a lender is not, I can't shift it to anybody else. In fact, it's funny, in the old days, we always used third-party GCs, right, to construct our buildings. And then in 2005, the market was really peaking and we had a hard time getting GCs. And we brought all of our construction operations in house, like our project managers, our superintendents, they all work for us. We were became the default builder, if you will. And I remember a headhunter goes, dude, you don't do that. You have to shift the risk to the GC. And this is what I told them. I said, at the end of the day, I hire the GC as the developer and I give the bank a personal guarantee. I sit in between those two people, or those two companies. And if the GC screws it up, I still own the risk. I mean, it may look like I shifted it to him, and contractually, I did shift the obligations of building the building. But if he screwed up enough, or in enough, time or money, like it's going to flow back to me. So where I told this headhunter is, I go, look, yes, I'm bringing some of these risks in house, but it also allows me to control and get direct access to the field, to the subcontractors, to the owners of the subcontractors, because the GC that sat in between me, he had his own agenda. He had his own profit to increase. He had his own stories that he told the subs. and sometimes that was good, but if the person didn't have good ethics or they were trying to, manipulate, which people do in that business, I mean, all business, I suppose, I found it to be incredibly like I took on more risk that I could then not even control, or I had to like go through people to try to control it. And of course, when they have their own agenda, they're not going to let me control it if it's against their agenda. So this is a way for us to control, really minimize that risk. We still took on risk, but by having that direct access, we minimize that. So if you take that story and then you apply it to every possible facet of the real estate development process, at every time we underwrite, every time we buy land, we build a building, we rent units, we're looking to constantly always look at it from the standpoint of what if this fails? What if this rent doesn't achieve what we think it's going to achieve? Maybe we better look at it at a lower rent to be more comfortable that we've mitigated that risk. And why I say it that way is because people who are entrepreneurs are naturally risk takers, and you're in most cases your own worst enemy in that. In other words, you're a risk taker, you're built to take risks, and you do take risks. Then the job becomes how to take risks that don't blow you up. And that's your own learning. That's, in fact, networks of people around me that I use, that my teams internally. Like, I encourage people, like, dude, you got to tell me no. Or the famous saying I'm a great problem solver. I cannot solve a problem I don't know about. Bring me all the problems. Don't hide anything. Don't cover it up or try to, I mean, if I can help solve it, great, I'll do that. But I want everything fleshed out, because, when you then get all the full picture, it's then, I mean, my job, our job as a company is to problem solve and mitigate risk. And we do that thousands of times in a deal every day, over, the 2 or 3 year life cycle of a development project. So I know that was a really long and winded answer, but it's really like, it's like having a mental model of how you approach risk, and you do it, every day in your business, as in your insurance and underwriting risk. But I would always advise, particularly people who are coming new into the business, to, like, hear these words. And, a lot of times people hear it and they go, well, I'm different, I can do better, I'm a better problem solver than these guys, and that's fine. But, like, know that that risk doesn't go away just because you think that way. In fact, arguably, you increase your risk because there's stuff you don't see. You can't admit to yourself that you have blind spots and need help from others to go, dude, you missed that thing, better watch out for that, right? And, got all kinds of vendors around me that, I'm like, dude, tell me, like, don't hide it. I don't like bad news, I don't like surprises, but, what I like worse is, bad news and surprises that, I'm late to the game on.